Do you ever feel like a fraud as a software engineer? Do you ever find yourself comparing yourself to others, whether it be senior engineers or professors or content creators even, and thinking about how much they seem to know and how you can never know as much as they do? Imposter syndrome is absolutely real, but the reality is that most people don't know nearly as much as you think they know, and nobody expects you to know nearly as much as you think they expect you to know. I would bet if we went to the most knowledgeable software engineer of all time, there would be far more things that they don't know than things that they do know. Now, of course, I am not that software engineer, but I do consider myself to be a fairly strong, competent software engineer. So what I want to do in this video to sort of prove this point is share with you a bunch of the things that I know little to nothing about. So I can't share everything I don't know because that would be an infinite list, but I'm going to share 100 of those things, and I would bet if you watch the whole video, you will find tons of things that you know more about than I do. I actually never took an operating systems class at university, and as a result, I have a very surface level understanding of operating systems. Of course, I know what they are and what they do and some of the core components, but at a very surface level, and of course I couldn't go build my own operating system or something like that. I don't understand modern hacking at all. There is probably a 0% chance that I could ever manage to successfully hack into any even mildly sophisticated system. While I love crypto as much as the next tech bro, I know basically nothing about blockchain development. I don't fully understand virtual reality or the metaverse. I certainly don't know how to develop for virtual reality or the metaverse. And for that matter, I'm still not sure I know what the metaverse is. I've never used Kubernetes before, and honestly, I don't know much about it, beyond the fact that it has a really cool name. I don't remember much about assembly, and honestly, I couldn't write even a very basic program in any assembly language right now. I don't really know UML diagramming. I can diagram something, of course, but I just don't know the correct way to do it in UML format. In fact, I once had an interview for a sort of strange position where they actually wanted me in the interview to do a UML diagram, and it was awkward, to say the least. There's far more frameworks and libraries that I don't know than ones that I do know. Here's a big list of ones that either I don't know very much about or I actually haven't used at all. I've never used PowerShell, I don't know any of the commands for it, and I don't know the scripting language either. I know very little about robotics at this point, and honestly, I don't know where to even start to build a robot. I've learned some system design along the way of being a software engineer, of course, but honestly, I don't know that much about it, and if I was to take a system design interview right now, I would expect I would probably fail it unless I studied a lot. Bluetooth is an incredible technology that under the hood, I don't fully understand how it works. While it seems interesting and I would love to learn more, I don't know very much at all about the history of computers and computer science. Despite spending most of my time on the front end and caring a lot about accessibility, I am not an expert on accessibility or the best practices. In fact, I find myself Googling almost every single time I need to do anything with accessibility to make sure that I'm doing it correctly. And on a similar note, even though I am pretty good with HTML, I don't know most of the ARIA roles and attributes, which are the attributes we use for accessibility, and I end up having to look them up almost every time. Every time I try to do anything with Xcode, it confuses me, and I've never used Android Studio. I don't know much about how the physical layer of networking actually works, and the fact that we can just send the internet over Ethernet completely blows my mind. While I can successfully exit Vim, that's pretty much all I know about Vim. I know a very basic amount to be able to edit a file, but other than that, I don't know any Vim key bindings and I'm very inefficient at using it. I've used Docker once or twice, but I don't know much about it, and if I needed to use it, I would have to Google my way through the whole thing. Despite the popularity, I've never done any .NET development. There are more database systems out there that I haven't used than ones that I have used, and while I know the pros and cons of a lot of the popular ones, I definitely don't know the ins and outs. Here's a bunch of the ones I've never used before. I mentioned it as one of the top trends of 2023, and I plan to learn it this year, but at the current moment, I don't know much of any WebAssembly. While I've done some cloud computing, I've never had a need for the major cloud computing platforms. So I actually don't know a whole lot about the ins and outs of AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, or Oracle Cloud. I just haven't needed any of them very much. Flutter seems extremely cool and powerful, but honestly, I've never used it and don't know a whole lot about it. While I can get around a terminal, I don't know any complex bash scripting, and whenever I need it, I find myself Googling the entire thing. Despite spending tons of time in CSS, I don't know most of the CSS frameworks and libraries. Here's a list of some of the most popular ones, where I might know some of the trade-offs and things like that, but I certainly don't know all of the different classes they provide and all of that. You know, all of those sorting algorithms that you're supposed to learn in university and then maybe use in coding interviews? Yeah, I don't know pretty much any of those by heart. I've never worked on a team that was truly using Agile, and as such I've never used it, and I don't have a very good understanding of how it works. As cool as a field as computer graphics seems to be, I know basically nothing about it. I never took a course on it or anything like that, but of course I'd love to learn eventually. I've never used a supercomputer, I've never interacted with a supercomputer. In fact, I don't think I've ever been in the same room as a supercomputer. All I know about supercomputing is presumably they're computers wearing tights and capes. Despite spending tons of time in GraphQL, I've actually never used the incredibly popular Apollo client. There are far more programming languages that I don't know than ones that I do know. Here's a big list of popular programming languages that I know very, very little about, if anything. I have a very surface level understanding of cryptography. I don't know the ins and outs of different algorithms or anything like that. There are tons of MIME types out there, and honestly I don't know most of them. I have to look them up. Similarly, with HTTP status codes, I usually have to look it up unless it's maybe one of the 3 or 4 that I have memorized. Web components are very high on my list of things I want to learn, but honestly, up until this point, I don't know much more than having skimmed a few articles. If I have to do anything complex with Git, so anything beyond like creating a branch and committing to it, I'm probably Googling it and just hoping that the Stack Overflow answer is correct. I know very little about machine learning and AI. Here's some of my favorite buzzwords that I don't know much about. I've never had to directly interact with the Jenkins continuous integration tool, so as such I don't really know how to use it. Despite spending most of my time on the front end, I actually don't have a super in-depth knowledge of design, especially graphic design. So, for example, I don't know color theory at all. Whenever I need to choose what color to make something, I usually just Google color palettes and colors that go good together and hope that what I Google is correct. I also don't have a very in-depth knowledge of how to choose a font. If I had it my way, I'd just make everything Comic Sans because it's kind of funny, but usually I just end up choosing one of 2 or 3 fonts that I always use and have no idea why I always use them. And most of the time, I just have designers tell me that I chose a terrible font and to change it. I don't know the syntax of YAML, and I've never interacted with it in a single programming language. I know basically nothing about any science outside of computer science, so physics, biology, chemistry, all of those I know basically nothing about. Of course, I can use a command line, but I don't know a whole lot about Linux and all of the different distributions and all of that stuff. I know very little advanced mathematics. I took a bunch of classes, but I've never really used them, and I've forgotten most of it. So honestly, I don't think I know much more than maybe high school math at this point. I know what SVGs are, I've used them before, and for the most part I know how they work. But I don't actually know the syntax of them. I don't think I could write an SVG without just Googling my way through pretty much all of it. On a similar note, I've basically never used WebGL, and I don't really know much of how it works. I don't know every feature of every language I've ever used. In fact, I don't know every feature of any language I've ever used. And I find myself Googling things constantly, even in languages I know well. In fact, in some languages I don't know as well, I've found myself Googling things like for loop syntax when I forget it. I know basically nothing about quantum computing. People have told me it's going to break cryptography and all of these things, but I don't actually know how it works at all. I can't help you build a PC, I can't help you fix your PC, and honestly, I don't know much about computer hardware beyond maybe the CPU and memory. Here's a bunch of computer hardware components that I know very little about how they actually work. Anything related to circuitry or electrical engineering in general goes straight over my head, and honestly I know very little to nothing about it. Despite all of the time I've spent on front-end development, I've never used most of the built-in browser web APIs. Here's a list of some of the ones that seemed cool to me just based on the names, but again, I've never used any of these. If I have to write even a remotely complex regular expression, then I'm just going to Google it. I sort of understand how regular expressions work and I can write a basic one, but anything complex, I am very likely to do it wrong, so I just hope that Stack Overflow is correct. There are so many things that I don't know that I don't even know I don't know, if that makes sense. And that's perfectly normal. And if you think there's somebody who would benefit from seeing all 100 of these things that I don't know, then make sure to share it with them. Otherwise, I will see you next time.